ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Africa Energy Indaba, and specifically welcome to the panel discussion where we are going to look into the very exciting conversation around life extension versus replacement for renewable energy technologies. So this afternoon, I am very privileged to be joined by a very esteemed expert panel of industry specialists that I think will contribute greatly to the conversation that we're going to have, and certainly share their experiences as well as their thoughts and views on this topic and how we can take it forward. So with that as a context, or with that as an opening remark, let me introduce you to this esteemed panel. So I am joined this afternoon by William Price, who is the CEO Country Manager for Enel Green Power. I'm also joined by Adimole Ugunbanjo, who is the Executive Vice President of Owando Clean Energy Limited based in Nigeria. And I am joined by Deva Govender, the Chief Executive Officer of Babcock Ntutuko International Group. So you can see that is quite a mouthful of names and titles, and I'm sure people you've encountered in the sector. And I know that all of them in the introductory conversations that we had with each other have great and vast experience and expertise in this topic, having all been in the sector for a very long time, but equally well undertaking exciting journeys as we transition the sector from its traditional fossil fuel base to all these exciting new renewable and more sustainable technologies that we're all talking about these days. So just coming to the question, life extension versus replacement. A technology choice is made and a lot of infrastructure development, the construction of the network, the way in which electricity and energy is disseminated and transported is based on the technology choices we make. And after a while, these technologies start facing the question, do we decommission, do we replace, do we repurpose? And there are certain definitely factors that drive the choices that we would make in these particular, for these particular aspects. And these choices are very integrated and they have very vast and far-reaching consequences in terms of the choices that we make. And today, that's really what we're here to talk about. Do we make this decision? Why do we make it? Is it helpful? What are the challenges that it causes us to face and encounter? And what are some of the consequences that we need to manage? But more than anything else, how do we create awareness around what this decision means for us from a sustainability perspective, from a socio-economic perspective, from being able to address some of the long-standing problems with energy that we face on the continent? How does all of this come together and enable us to use this as a platform to move the energy sector forward? That's really what we want to talk about today. So without any further ado, and in no particular order, I would just like to ask our panelists to share their reflections on how they see this particular aspect, and maybe perhaps what are some of the particular issues that they think we should be addressing and be concerned about as we make this choice or don't make this choice. So William, I would like to offer you the first comment.
Oh, thank you very much. Very happy to be here with the panel and part of this discussion. And thank you for having me. I would like to start just by bringing about something that perhaps is obvious, but not so obvious. But when we're chatting about renewable energy, what's happened in the last few years with renewable energies is the advancements. But more importantly, why? And then this will have us step in the direction of what happens in the future when it comes to replacement or refurbishment of projects. And the reason why renewable energy is successful, partly because, of course, the clean energy, but its ability to their ability to put the projects in operation with a very, very short life cycle. So to design a project, to build it, and to put it in service, depending on certain aspects, this could be done in a matter of a couple of years. And why is that significant? Is that each iteration of a project that you build, you can apply the new latest technologies and advancements for that particular technology. So when we're looking forward ahead, and all of us are trying to think our crystal ball, what is the new technology? Well, for sure that there will be some, and how to apply it. When I first came here in South Africa a few years ago, our first wind project was 2 megawatts. A wind project was 2 megawatts, and then we went into 3 megawatts, and then 3.15 megawatt machines, then 3.6, and currently we're commissioning and putting in place 4.2 megawatt machines, which are the largest wind turbines on the South African continent. And we're looking, even bidding going forward with future projects, we're looking at 5 and 6 megawatt turbines. And why is because as each iteration of project, we learn and we apply new advances in technology, and that's what's helping with prices, and that's what's helping with competitiveness and between projects. To start the next aspect or point is a project when it hits end of life or 20 years, there's a lot of things that are going to happen between now and 20 years, and it would depend on of course those advances I just talked about, but also technology between the solar projects. Like a solar project that has, of course, quite a different technology than a wind project, which are primarily renewable energy projects in South Africa. Solar projects don't have things that move, and when it comes to unless it's a project that if it's still a thermal, perhaps it does, but unless it has a tracking system. But a wind project has things that operate and rotate, so its life cycle is quite big different. So in that regards, what would be necessary to try to wrap up here and give the other speakers an opportunity is what is the when these units fail or hit certain life cycle, what is the offtake agreement, in particular, what is the capability to change that or upgrade it? In most cases, it requires in South Africa, a notification, an agreement with the off-taker, such as Eskom, and depending on its change, also a license revision from NERSA. So it's not for us to just start changing components from year to year is not that simple. Anyways, that's a beginning discussion. I would open other colleagues.
Thank you very much for that. I think a great opening perspective from a key operator of renewable energy technologies in South Africa. So thank you for that perspective. Before I hand over to the next panelist, maybe just a reminder and a request to our audience that if you've got any questions, please feel free to use the question and answer facility on the Zoom conferencing facility to raise your questions, and we will definitely respond to your questions in the course of the discussion today. So please make use of that. And with moving from South Africa, I think let's go to Nigeria and listen to the perspectives from Adimole. Adimole, over to you.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks for having me. It's actually my pleasure being a part of this discourse. What I would like to do really is to piggyback on what William had said earlier, particularly on the technology side. However we look at it, renewable energy technology is still at its infancy. So iteration is rapid. And whatever installations were put in place 15, 20 years ago may probably not even be supported by the OEMs today, because technology has changed over that period of time. And with that time as well comes the proliferation of knowledge in that sector. And what that then does as well is that it drops the cost of some of these components. So it may be cheaper for you to install a brand new facility to generate power than for you to extend the life of an existing one. There are different elements to it you need to consider, of course, what the policy is, the regulation around end of life and what you do with. Do you repurpose? Do you recycle? How do you actually decommission if you're required to? And then there's the continuous environmental consideration that you need to put in play. That is continuing to evaluate the impact of the project or the facility on the environment. So even at the point of decision making, that has to be considered. So cost, of course, is essential because it's a business. I personally don't believe that access to electricity is a fundamental human right. It is not. All right. Access to electricity is a competitive advantage that if you can afford it, you engage it to create value, or perhaps to use for your domestic comfort. Therefore, for those of us who invest in energy infrastructure, it has to make economic sense. And the decision as well to either extend the life of a facility or to build a new one is a cost-based decision. And again, going back to technology, you will find that efficiency will change as technology iterates. So you have maybe a solar panel 20 years ago with a 30% efficiency compared to same panel, same size today. And that will continue. And based on that, what we then need to string in from the start is we must recognize that at some point, these facilities will come to end of life. And regulations must be clear to guide on what we do at end of life, so that that can go into the design of the facilities themselves. How we repurpose, taking battery, for example. So you take an electric vehicle, average lifespan for batteries in an electric vehicle is usually between 8 and 10 years. But that's not the death of the battery system itself. So you take it out, you repurpose it, and then you use it for solar home systems, for example. And that does another 5 to 7 years at best. And then after that, you begin to talk about recycling, decoupling, and then just turning it into or including in the process of manufacturing new batteries. So that's an example, but it's not the same for all. But the bottom line is we must ensure that in initial design, we are mindful of the end of life and what has to be done at that point. And if we're decommissioning and repurposing, then perhaps that also goes into the consideration for the materials with which we build the facilities. And if I may very quickly go to my background in oil and gas, right? From the moment you're designing your field development plan, you are required to have an abandonment plan for all the wells that you're going to drill. And not just a plan, a budget. You set aside cash that you will use to manage the abandonment appropriately. But that's on the safety side. When you now, however, look at what we're doing today in some cases, and I'm sure William perhaps has seen, some of this, is that we're now repurposing some of the wells, the ones that have the adequate temperature levels to be used for re-entry in producing geothermal energy. So, so that's a transition from having produced oil and gas to now tapping into the one thing we never wanted to see when we're drilling for oil, which is water. We now tap into that to, then produce geothermal energy. But again, the important thing is we recognize the iteration of technology. It's rapid because we're still, we're in early days, all right? And things will change over time. Efficiency will increase over time. Cost will remain a big consideration. But environmental considerations must also be at the core of it. And that said, the decision to then, extend or decommission becomes more of an economic decision with all those other considerations than anything else.
Ademola, thank you very much for that. You've certainly made some good, strong points and some very interesting perspectives that you've shared with us as well. I think maybe just, you talked about in the oil and gas sector having to decide abandonment and cost, provide for the cost write-ups from front. I mean, I think the coal mining sector is very similar. So yes, definitely important to have given thought to how you want to deal with the decommissioning issues right up front and build it into the project. But I think you've made some important points, and there's perhaps a good link for Deva to pick up on, given his role and background. So Deva, I think over to you.
Thank you, Kiran. Thank you for the opportunity for participating in the panel. It's highly appreciated. So a couple of things from my side. I was going to start off about what Ademola spoke about, the principle about access to electricity, but let me just hold that back for a while. Maybe I'll comment a bit about a couple other things. So I want to start first by talking about maybe my belief is that in any country, no matter where you are, energy security is paramount of importance. That's the key issue. And to make sure you have energy security, you need diverse energy sources. So my belief is that all energy sources have a role to play in the energy mixing, no matter what country you are. If you're blessed with in a country where you have the ability to produce power from renewables, be it wind or solar, or even nuclear, or even gas, I think there's a need for a mix in all those areas. So getting back to the issue about accessibility and access, I think once you've got the issue of security, you need to make sure your people have access. And I'm not fundamentally disagreeing with Ademola about that. I'll share something with you. When I was speaking in quite a few forums over the last 5 years, one of the things that fascinated me is when I used to propose that the way to energize Africa was to talk about a super grid. And everyone bought into that, but there was always the comment on the sideline saying, why do you want to give access? Why do you want to give electricity access to people that have never had it before? Would it make a difference to them? They've never had it before, so why bother giving to them? And that was a frustrating issue for me. And I have seen a project that was run in South Africa where you gave electricity access to a community that never ever had that electricity before, and it fundamentally changed their lives of the elderly people and especially the young children. So I'm an advocate of saying, we should be pushing out getting the access level to electricity as much as we can. And the only way we can do that in Africa is by having a super grid and sharing those electricity resources. When it comes to the issue of renewables, I can throw out some things to think about. When you talk about life extension, it is not as simple as when you talk about life extension for conventional fossil units. Typically, when we do life extension for fossil units, we look at the control systems, the CNI, and we replace that. And we may look at upgrading the turbine. But I think we in territory for renewables, where we have to look very carefully and work out exactly how we do life extension. So a couple of things that I'll just put in initially is if you've got a power purchase agreement for 20 years, doesn't make any sense to consider actually doing a life extension. You would sweat that asset till your power purchase agreement is up. However, if you're in a market where you're competing competitively, then obviously it would make sense that you keep up with technology and you increase the size of your plant, because markets actually encourage the fact that you actually replace. So I think those are the key things I want to put on the table so far. Thank you.
Deva, thank you very much. I think also quite a few key points that you've made. And I think there's some very nice themes coming out that we could maybe explore a little bit more in detail. So I think the point around pricing and making a cost-based economic decision for life extension versus replacement. And then, of course, I think specific to the South African environment, but in general, the way in which most of the renewable energy projects are being funded is off the back of strong guarantees, be they from government or very credible off-takers with strong balance sheets for some of the off-grid projects. But essentially, there's some requirement for guaranteed off-take. So, if we take these three kind of economic cost-based decisions, what are some of the things that you believe we should be considering differently if we wanted to create perhaps a balanced approach to extension versus replacement? And I'm advocating that we kind of consider it because what we also don't want to have as an outcome, and if you take the South African IPP program, it's a potential outcome. You've built plant in different tranches. They've been commissioned at more or less the same time. So they will be decommissioned at more or less the same time and leave quite a gap from a capacity perspective. And I think that starts to threaten this whole energy security issue that you brought onto the table, Deva. So if we just had to look at cost, I mean, where do we create the balance between the economic decision-making criteria and managing energy security and reliability through the space of extension versus replacement? So I'm not sure if there's any volunteers to go first, but I don't want to keep going round and round in the same order. Maybe Ademole, I'll throw it to you.
Thank you, Karen. If you hadn't nominated me, I would have volunteered. So you're right about the need for balance, particularly for our continent. And I say particularly for our continent because of the energy gaps that we have on this continent. And whether we speak to industrialization or the digital economy, the bottom line is Africa is behind the curve. And there is no industrialization, there is no digital economy without power. Therefore, the need to unlock Africa's growth potential with power supersedes every other consideration when you're speaking from the intergovernmental, multilateral, and state actor segment. When you speak, however, from the private sector angle, whilst the motivation could be colored with some level of altruism to help with social development, human capital development, value enhancement, when I say our, I speak to Africa, our ability to move raw materials through the process of manufacturing into finished products so that we can, do more of manufacturing the things that we consume and retain value within the African continent. That is always part of the consideration for most of the private sector organizations that invest in energy. But again, there is a cost to the funding. And because of cost of funds, there is need for economic consideration. And as you rightly said, when the power is eventually generated, somebody has to buy it. And that's why oftentimes you see the need for a power purchase agreement signed with the government, guaranteeing the offtake. Because it's important to the government to create access to power for the people, whoever they may be. And to Thaler's point earlier, when you provide power to a community that's never seen it, you don't say, what are they going to do with it? There was a time when we didn't have. We may not have seen it, but, I believe, well, I'm young enough to have woken up to power in my community. Right? But I'm sure, some woke up and there was no power, and then it eventually came, and then it spawned enterprise, right? And then growth, and then development. So there's no argument against that. There couldn't be any reasonable arguments in that regard. But if I could refer to my point earlier about the fact that it's not access to energy is not a fundamental human right. All right. It is an enabler. And that enablement must be a decision that the government must make in order to grow, the economy, to spur growth and development. And of course, ensure that, the future of their sovereign state, is one that is globally competitive, right? So, and to very quickly wrap up, what I'm saying essentially is the considerations are different when you look from the private sector angle and when you look from the public sector angle. Because for the private sector, economic viability for investment is essential. For the public sector, energy security, access guarantee, all of those will be towards the development of their social system, the economic system, and the human capital and aspirations, powering aspirations, and fueling human consumption. Because that's what this conversation is about. The conversation is about human consumption. How do we power human consumption? We have done it in a certain way in the past that has hurt the climate, invariably hurting ourselves. And we've woken up to that realization. And now we will change how we do it. But what we're not talking about is changing consumption altogether. And I guess that's a different conversation for another session.
Definitely, I think that could be a very long conversation. But thank you very much for that perspective. And I just want to throw it to William to perhaps give us the private sector view on this balance that you've pointed out, or this area, a gray area that you've pointed out, Adimolo, around balancing the public sector and private sector requirements, in addition to the pricing and the energy security and the energy access then. So William, a few more factors for you to consider in terms of the balance equation.
Okay, so there's four parts to your question there, so I'll try to address them a little bit as I can. First of all, the balancing of private sector versus government. The private sector is quite available, especially in South Africa, but even in the African market. But there has to be some incentives for investment. So unlike governments who make investments for returns of investment, governments takes, of course, tax dollars or revenue created by the people within the country, and they take that and invest it in infrastructure. Versus a private entity doesn't do it for a nonprofit. It has to make a return on its investment. So your business model is completely different. The government, of course, should, in a simpler terms, should establish the foundation or infrastructures or in electricity perspective, transmission grid. In South Africa, you start out with Eskom being the utility, and it's a government entity. And then you have this creation of infrastructure and grid. Grid is the roadway to deliver electricity. Think of it like highways. We all use the highways and we're all driving on them, but and we contribute for that infrastructure. Then when it comes to when the country hits a certain maturity, such as South Africa has, you've had this discussion about unbundling. I'm not going to get into that, but IPPs become a fundamental part because they can provide economic as well as diversification and risk mitigation to the utilities. Why? Is because we provide energy to the utility they don't have to worry about. We sell energy to in our case Eskom or utility, and who takes that risk is the IPP, not government nor Eskom. So if a transformer fails, Eskom doesn't pay for that, the IPP does. Does it ask for a tariff increase? No, it doesn't, because it's locked into a certain tariff. So that's beneficial. So that's the, of course, complete distinction. We can get more in there if you'd like. But as far as the economic, I'd like to address your next question as economic of renewable energy projects, and then when you would do this refurbishment or repowering or replacement, It's also a technology issue. We didn't really touch on that. And why is that? As I said earlier, Adamola, he even made a comment that such equipment is no longer supported. That's true. If I have we've experienced, like, for example, a wind turbine that was installed in the 2010, and that a reduction gear or some component of that wind turbine fails. Once you've consumed whatever available spare parts inventory is, then what are you going to use? So you either try to refurbish that reduction gear, but replacing it, maybe that doesn't exist, and that requires you to replace it. Not much different than if you have an obsolete vehicle and the transmission goes bad. Well, you're going to have, what if you don't have a replacement transmission because that no one manufactures that vehicle anymore because it's 10 years old. So you're left with the choice of these projects are designed to operate and for the 20-year life of the PPA. But if something fails because of technology enhancements, because we're constantly improving it, to have this huge, massive inventory of spares for each life cycle iteration is not always so available. So you're left with the choice of sometimes retrofitting or redesigning your project midway. So from an economic perspective, let me try to touch on that a little bit. There was a point in South Africa, and it was in the news, where government wanted, especially the earlier rounds with the Renewable Independent Power Producer Program, to renegotiate previous contracts. Why was that? Is because the concept was, hey, these projects were entered to contracts. They've been 5 years into them, so now you have 15 years of PPA. What if the government started over fresh, and you can do instead of a 15-year PPA, we'll give you a 20-year PPA. Could you lower the price? Well, in concept, it's a pretty good concept and good idea, because you refinance and you can extend your project, and even after 20 years, the project is going to continue to produce some energy. Maybe not the same amount that when the project was new, but it would continue to produce. And especially if you're given the opportunity to retrofit. The challenge there that came across, in particular to some of our projects, is the obsolescence of equipment. So if I'm going to try to finance a project so I have existing financing, I want to refinance it, I start over, and of course the entity that's financing is going to say, okay, how are you going to extend this project? Show me that you have adequate resources. Do you have adequate spares? How is this project going to operate in the period that you want to refinance? And that became pragmatic, because it's hard because these components were obsolete. When we built our NNL, we built our solar projects in South Africa about 6-7 years ago. The first ones that went online, we used a product called thin film. Thin film was a photovoltaic technology that was the latest, greatest, the best technology at the time. And we installed hundreds of megawatts of solar projects. 2-3 years ago, thin film technology is obsolete. Doesn't exist. You can't even find it anymore. So if I'm going to extend that project, how do I have? How can I do that with obsolete technology? And it's not like you can replace it with a photovoltaic, like a polycrystalline and monocrystalline panel, because they're drastically different in voltage and technology and wattage. So it becomes very pragmatic. So my point is that in some cases we're going to be forced to do retrofits or changes, because the technology is such that you can't replace those components, and the spares won't last forever. So we're going to have to come up. So you're going to have a technology requirement to do it. And from an economic perspective, of course, you're going to preserve the project. It's a case by case and by what kind of technology you have. But also you need to have the capability, as I said earlier, the right to be able to change that component. And when it comes to some of the challenge we face, that right is not automatic. So if you have a power purchase agreement and I wanted to change that component, I have to request or I have to change the license, and that's not always guaranteed. So in some cases, if I have a older PPA and the tariff is high, well, maybe the off-taker doesn't want me to do that because they'd rather purchase power that was cheaper. So it's not as simple as just, okay, it's something broke, I don't want to replace it, refurbish it, and make it better. And then somehow, if it could change your nameplate capacity of facility, it wouldn't automatically be approved. So, anyways, I think I've tried to address your questions that you've asked.
William, thank you very much for that. And without putting you on the spot and asking you to give away all your company's trade secrets, you've obviously been looking at alternative energies for longer than you've been in the South African IPP program globally. And perhaps, maybe just from a real life perspective, what are some of your thoughts in countries where you're actually facing these decisions, specifically in countries where you don't have guaranteed power purchase agreements?
We're given the opportunity, the power purchase agreements are different. We're given the opportunity because we have a requirement to generate. So some of the power purchase agreements are different, meaning that our power purchase agreements that are common with renewable energy independent power producer program they're take or pay contracts, and they don't have generally contract provisions to generate a certain amount of electricity. Some contracts have a requirement to generate so many watt hours per year. So if you have a component that's failed, you have to have the right to be able to replace it or modify that to meet the contractual obligations. So that's the difference between some of the projects that we face in other parts of the world versus here. If I have a commercial contract, for example, that commercial entity is expecting me to generate, expecting a certain amount of performance from that project. If it's not able to because of a problem with the component, then sure, you'd be given the responsibility and the right to change that component to meet your contractual obligations. It's not the same with certainly with the renewable energy program contract. So it depends on the area. It depends on the contract, and depends on the need. It depends, of course, on the price of PPA and a whole variety of factors.
William, thank you very much for that. And Deva, maybe arising from William's comments, a little bit of a different question. So we talk about technology, about the high level of obsolescence that occurs during a plant's life cycle, which clearly is a key consideration for the decision of replacement versus extension. Where do the technology companies feature in this, and how do they see it, the engineering and technology companies? I mean, are we sacrificing some economic value and benefit for this constant need to adapt to technology? Could we see it differently? If we come back to the original point that Ademole made about you got to decide on the strategy up front, would that create a clearer landscape in terms of how we adapt technology to fit into these decisions, and maybe again a point of balance?
Hey, thank you, Kiran. So just a couple of things, maybe just to say, I think William is right about the technology, and that's one of the things, like an organization like Babcock Analytical Engineering, we are saying we believe that battery technology, for example, has to go hand in hand with renewables. It will not be able to survive on its own. You need large-scale battery technology, and that's why we're looking at issues like that, and obviously the maintenance of those plants. But just to put a perspective around technology is very important, because there's the jury is still out about how much renewables you can actually have in a country that will actually not collapse the grid. And I think that's where technology comes in very, very importantly. One of the things we may see in South Africa, I know it wasn't a requirement in the first 4 bid windows, but certainly I think maybe the next couple of bid windows, is for the renewable players and the plants to participate in the ancillary service market. There's a requirement that will be coming from the grid operator to say, we expect you to provide, for example, a 15-minute reserve. And I think that's where technology plays a very big role. I can see some of the wind turbines, and William can correct me later, where I think there will be some adaptability for them to participate in those markets. Obviously, on the solar, we may need some of the controls to be changed. And that's where technology is very important, because the grid operator will be looking for AGC control, automatic governing control, to make sure that they can regulate that. So I think the big issue is also when you're looking at replacement. Well, actually, before you get to replacement, one of the issues is we've got to ask ourselves the question: is if investors, what is that compelling case for investors to come actually invest in Africa for renewable plants? I mean, the fact that we probably got the most abundant sunshine in the world probably is a good thing. But if you just take South Africa as a context, the sites that have already that is already owned, they've got the advantage already. So when, for example, if you've got the solar sites, if you want to replace and you want to upgrade those or you want to extend it, the civil structure will hold that, like replacement new panels. But I'm not sure if the same thing is applicable to the turbines. As you go bigger and bigger, I'm not sure if the existing civil structure. But the fact that you've got the land already is already a tick to say, well, you've got a head start on that. But the big driver from an economic sense is, will there be a market that will attract investors to say, we want to actually invest? And I think the decision around a market is fundamental. But going back to the issue of technology, from a grid operator point of view, it's very important that whatever comes on and where we enhance the plants or we upgrade or we extend, this whole debate about you need an inertia in your system to make sure that you can withstand major events like fault levels and stuff like that. And unfortunately, the technology that I know from renewables, they will not be able to support issues that happen in the first example, 500 milliseconds. That's why you need that rotating mass, you need inertia. So you can probably get it from gas turbines and issues like that. So the amount of renewables you have is something that we have to look at going forward. We don't have that problem, for example, in South Africa. We haven't reached that penetration level where it's become such a big issue. But the country that's leading it is probably Ireland, but they've got a very low total output, like 7,000 megawatts. But where the case studies is gonna happen is obviously in isolated grids like Australia and South Africa, to say, if you have so much renewables, at what point do you start compromising the integrity of your grid? And I think that's where technology plays a big role. And I think there's a lot of work still required in that front.
Deva, thank you very much for those comments. And I think, we've spoken at length about the economics and we're starting to, touch a bit more on some of the technology and perhaps the grid stability factors. But I want us to just maybe quickly reflect on some of the broader enablers. So whether it's the decision-making criteria around replacement versus extension, or creating an environment of certainty around, when you address this or how you address this. What are, in your thoughts, some of the political and perhaps policy and regulation enablers that could facilitate this decision-making that would give us this balance that we're looking for and create a sound economic decision-making environment? So maybe, Adimole, this time, am I picking on you again? But never mind, I'll start with you again.
Thank you, Karen. First off, let me very quickly speak to two things. One is the question on technology and how do we respond to iteration in technology in the face of making business decisions around whether we extend or we do not extend, or, that's the life of the facility. So we cannot curate the technology industry. It's a separate industry in itself. And what it's seeking to achieve is leadership that is, amongst themselves. So if we take solar, for example, what you would then want to, do as a technology company is to make sure that your own panels or whatever technology it is you're using are more efficient. So you get a better bang, for the buck. All right. And then over time, it becomes cheaper. And then over time, scale becomes smaller. So that is competition that we need to grow the renewable energy sector. So we don't want to stifle it. What would then happen is you already have a power plant that you have installed in a particular place on old technology. And when I say old, I'm not talking about 50 years old. I'm talking about sometimes it will be 3 years and it's already old, right? And then you have this new technology, requires smaller land size, because land is also not an abundant, resource like that, okay? So you require smaller land size, you require smaller modules and, elements of the facility, and you have a much higher efficiency. And then to top that up, it's cheaper. So the conversation we're having today is about at end of life, do we extend or do we replace? How about before end of life? Technology has changed significantly. You have a brand new option that is much cheaper, allows you to make more money from that PPA you've already signed, that the tariff has already been set, even if you have agreed on an increment percentage over a period of time. The bottom line is you've set it. But now you have new technology. So what you are thinking about is how do I, replace something that is, still working, or do I then move, decommission it from this location, move it to a different location, and install something else here. Those decisions we will have to make as this industry evolves. And so the question about battery and the need for battery to evolve as much as renewables evolve. Why is that important? It's important because of storage. But again, in that technology space, we're already seeing solutions for storage outside battery, because we've got to identify what we're solving for. So we're not solving for batteries, we're solving for storage. So now you have solutions that take that photovoltaic thermal heat, stores it in heat form in a heat exchanger, and then converts that to electricity. So in the day when it's sunny, you have your direct conversion, and then it stores at the same time as well in a heat exchanger, and then it converts, when the sun is down. That's storage. And the solution that I have seen cuts out batteries completely, reducing the facility cost by about 30 to 33%. That is the reality of our world, and we will continue to see more of that. That said, however, the point is, to your question now, the need for government to regulate how power is distributed, how power is generated, whether we decommission or we extend, it's important. And it's important so that we don't solve a problem to create another one. What we're trying to do is responsibly provide energy for human consumption. And when I say responsibly, that means through non-fossil or carbon-emitting sources. So that's fine. But what do we do then? How do we manage that? The materials that go into manufacturing the plants and the facilities that we use to generate these the energy that we need, those must be regulated. What we do with them must be regulated. How we decommission them must be regulated. Up to today, there are ocean liners that transport oil and gas, or crude specifically in this case, that still wash their tanks in the Atlantic. But that's against regulation, polluting the Atlantic. So my point is, if we don't regulate it, we'll find that we may inadvertently solve the energy pollution problem with renewable sources without thinking about what we do and how we manage the materials that we use to construct, the plants. And that's why regulation is important. Yes, there is need to consider cost. That's for me as a businessman, right? I need to consider cost. I need to look at, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. Take rural electrification, for example.
Right? I'm going to be a little bit rude and cut you off because we're running out of time, and I would definitely like to hear a quick perspective from Deva and then William as well. It's not to detract from the points. I think the discussion is very interesting, but time is never our friend in these conversations. So Deva, maybe over to you to perhaps quickly provide your feedback and your perspective in terms of policy, regulation, other enablers to move this decision forward.
Thank you, Kiran. So the first thing I just wanted to say is that I think one of the key issues that will guide the whole issue is about the market. I would encourage that a market actually be developed, and that's what will attract investors. That's the first thing. The second thing is whether you actually go for life extension or replacement all depends on how you interact with the grid. You can have all the generation you want, but if you don't have a grid that is stable enough, then you have failed in terms of what our social need is to deliver electricity access to everyone. So I think that's a key issue. And the third issue is about the economics behind the whole issue. I think definitely a need for renewables to be accelerated. I think the key issue here is I don't think the government's going to drive that. I think the private sector has a much far bigger role to actually lead and provide that catalyst so that we can speed it up.
Thank you, Deva. Thank you very much for that. Maybe a reminder to our audience, if you haven't gotten your questions in as yet, you've got a few minutes more to post them on the question and answer facility, and we'll be sure to address them. And with that, William, let me hand over to you for your final thoughts on, how we can create and what enablers we need to create to take this forward.
Sure, thank you. I think I'd like to touch on the enablers, especially the aspect, because I'm private versus government, is what government can do and what private can do. So obviously, as I said before, private is for profit. So when I'm bidding or even commercial, I want the lowest tender because I want to win a tender, provide electricity. So I want to say, hey, pick me because I provide the best solution at the lowest price. So then when it goes to, we talked about things like storage. Completely agree with storage. Renewable energy sources are variable. And that's true because when it's sunny or windy, so they do vary. So to have some hybrid cycle to introduce energy storage makes sense. Also, the adoption of even green hydrogen, this type of energy storage or capability when there's excess renewable energy to utilize that for green hydrogen production. So as humans, we're trying to figure this out. The challenge there is as a private sector, if I went to go bid this innovative solution, I wouldn't win. Why? Is because unless it's specific to a tender where the government has said, hey, look, I want a hybrid solutions, or I want storage solutions, then I wouldn't, then if I introduce this concept, it would be expensive because storage adds more cost because the inefficiency of storage. So what government, Adamola said, leadership's key, and government leadership and vision's key. If we introduce energy storage, even allowed it as a modification to existing facilities, we would like to as an L, do some storage with our existing facilities. Can't do it unless you get things, PPAs modified, and it gets allowed by ESCOM. And remember, energy storage is not renewable. Energy storage, any form of energy, even conventional forms of energy, can be stored by batteries. So it's not just, batteries are not renewable, put it that way. So, but they do complement the variable nature of renewables. And finally, I like to think about, want to present something that from where government can do, or even industry, even outside of independent power producers, is I brought up this point about refurbishment and even changing out panels. What that does, or even replacing blades. These things create an opportunity to waste. Panels, if I'm changing out some of our projects, we have over 600,000 panels. If you can imagine that, some projects more. And if I have to replace these panels, what do you do with these things? So it's considered electronic waste. So it's not like you can throw that in your landfill. So we as an industry need to figure out how to manage this. A wind blade, a wind turbine blade is quite huge. So what do we do after a blade's broken? We have to replace it. How do we dispose of this blade? It's not like you can take it to the local landfill. And as well as retrofitting structures, we have even components within, like I brought up earlier, the reduction gear. If businesses looked at this and say, look, I can rebuild these gears rather than you replace a new reduction gear, I can refurbish that. So as South Africans, we're looking at, or countries in Africa, we're looking at how to create more business and opportunity and transition to renewable energy. This is a key thing that as we're getting more mature as an industry, in particular South Africa, because we've been doing it for almost 7-8 years. That now we're finding the need for these other industries to pop up to support these refurbishment opportunities. So from an audience perspective, I'd like to last my word out as an IPP, we'd love to have South Africa businesses that we can take these challenges that we have, these refurbishment challenges, and have private industry and new businesses pop up to say, I'm here for that solution.
William, thank you very much. And I think that's a great note to have finalized your comments. We've genuinely run out of time, so it just remains for me to say a very big thank you to our esteemed panel members. I really think you've given us, and I hope that young engineers and our youth resources that are looking at strategic asset management and operations and maintenance have certainly benefited from some of the very interesting points that you brought to the table. So my sincere appreciation to all of you for a very enlightening and insightful discussion. I think you've put a lot of new things on the table. I myself, came in with some thoughts, and you've really added to it. I love the part of the conversation that goes just beyond the conventional value chain that we're looking at. Let's start looking at additional things as part of this decision, and really looking at the development and growth of Africa and all the sustainable development goals we need to achieve. I think creation of new value chains is always something that we're looking at in terms of economic growth and prosperity. I like the question about why wait for the end of life before you make the decision. If technology has advanced to an extent where the decision can be, it's more economically sustainable, gives you a better outcome, then why not consider it? And then I think, just coming back to the fundamentals, let's make sure that the grid remains stable. Let's make sure that we can dispatch power and ensure that it is consumed, create the markets and support the investment environment. Those are some of the key things that would lead us forward in terms of the choices between life extension and replacement. Thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you to the audience for listening.